Make way! The High Priestess approaches.
The monster sat up in his prison cell, focusing on a slim figure coming down the stairs. In the room's single witch light, he could make out a few details. A black gown with a narrow skirt that flared over the stone floor, a spiked headdress, and a long, dark veil over her features. The orange pinpricks of his eyes narrowed. The guard stood at attention as the priestess approached the cell, her head high and her hands demurely folded.
Make haste, men,
barked the captain.
Secure the creature. Tighten those bonds.
She stopped just short of the bars as the guards made a show of pulling levers on either side of the cell, stretching the chains tighter on the monster's limbs.
How long has he been here?
3 days, my lady, but he has refused all his meals.
The priestess looked steadily at the captive monster.
Does he have a name?
He calls himself Sans, my lady.
The high priestess's headdress tilted to one side.
You know, Captain, wood and iron bars cannot hold a boss monster.
The men jumped as the monster snorted, as much as a skeleton could do so.
Funny, I told him the same thing,
he said, his voice rough and painfully loud in the tiny space. The captain gripped his sword hilt with one hand.
Silence, monster.
No, let him speak.
Sans grinned wider, baring huge, jagged teeth. Though he remained sitting, he towered over the humans on the other side of the bars, especially the young woman.
How generous of you, witch. Tell me, how may I repay your kindness? Let you take my soul, powers my magic, or add me to your little evil collection?
The guards muttered to each other in dismay.
How dare you speak to her with such disrespect? She is the High Priestess of this realm, and you will address her as such.
Wow, what a loyal dog. You heard her, I get to talk.
He glared down at the priestess, ignoring the captain's sputtering.
Now, witch, tell me, what are you gonna do to me? I ain't very fond of surprises. My heart can't take it.
He placed his bony palm on his chest.
Grant me this one kindness, you magic thief.
The high priestess did not move.
Captain, free him.
Sans lifted the equivalent of an eyebrow as the men gasped.
High Priestess?
Release the bonds.
The captain swallowed.
Is this a wise...
Free him now.
The woman's hands dropped to her sides as the guards reluctantly pushed the levers back up.
Sans, I'd like to make you my apprentice,
she told the bemused skeleton.
In return, I will give you your freedom.
Stunned silence hung in the air.
You want me to be your apprentice?
He looked at her, and he threw his head back and roared with laughter. The captain bristled, moving in front of the woman with his sword drawn, then stepping back at her murmured command. The other men winced as the monster's laughter echoed off the walls.
How stars that is rich!
Sans slapped his thigh bone.
You know, I'd be less offended if you dragged me out and forced me to be your slave.
Suddenly, his grin had no humor in it. The priestess tensed as the monster reached up to grasp his collar.
Do you think I'm stupid? Me, as your apprentice witch? Please, don't fool yourself with your own lies.
The collar shattered, crumbling to dust. He gave another laugh, eyes glowing a hellish orange.
But I guess I should thank you for the opportunity, 'cause now I'm going to kill you all!
The air around him exploded in white-hot flame. Power raced through the skeleton in scintillating waves, lighting the cell as bright as a hot day. Now Sans could do what he'd dreamed of since the first human sorcerer had caught him unawares, murder everyone in his path. There were so many possibilities. Fire was fun, but usually worked too fast. He could always tear them limb from limb, but that was messy and labor-intensive. Then there was blue magic, which turned them into stupid, flailing ragdolls, easy to pick up and impossible to put down. A twinge of suspicion interrupted his musings. Where was the screaming, or the sound of fleeing footsteps? Sans lowered his aura until he could see the room clearly, and what he saw chilled him to his very soul. His attack hadn't killed anyone. It hadn't even singed them. The cell's bars had disintegrated, but now a translucent golden haze stretched from floor to ceiling, and his magic was splashing off it like raindrops off an umbrella. The guardsmen were bravely huddled by the stairs, slack-jawed but unharmed, while the High Priestess stood right where she'd been, hands raised and lips moving. Sans was not quite so confident now. In fact, his first impulse was to run away screaming. This was the stuff a monster's nightmares were made of. He was trapped by a barrier. Once upon a time, he tormented his brother with stories about a bad little skeleton who went out alone after dark, or talked to strangers, or didn't do his big brother's chores for him, and it always ended with the bad skeleton getting caught by a human. All monsters heard those bedtime stories and learned that there was no escape from barriers. Not even the king was strong enough to break one, and just touching them would kill you. If you were lucky, the human would drag you off to be their slave, never to be seen again. And if you weren't, they'd squeeze the magic from your body or snap your ribs open to dig your soul out, then leave you to die and let your dust blow away. Panic closed over him like a shroud. He gathered all of his magic and threw himself into a shortcut out of the castle, only to strike an invisible wall and bounce right back into the cell. Shaking his head to clear it, Sans looked around and realized that the barrier had him boxed in on all sides. Anger saved him, as it always had. In another moment, he wasn't afraid anymore. He was furious at his captors and their whole cheating, thieving, murdering, thoroughly worthless race. And it was the worst possible moment for the priestess to open a small hole in the barrier and say,
Sans, please calm yourself. I don't want to hurt you.
She snapped the barrier shut half a second before a wickedly pointed bone thudded into it, the tip nearly touching her nose.
So be it,
the young woman said tightly, and the bone evaporated as the barrier glowed brighter. Sans knew better than to waste his energy in an all-out assault. Instead, the boss monster contemplated the force it'd take to punch through one small area around her neck or her heart. He might still be afraid, but every fiber of his being wanted that woman dead on the floor. So, with a flick of his wrist, he summoned an array of massive, razor-sharp bones, almost too many for the cell to hold, and began firing them at blinding speed, one after another. The priestess didn't react, but as he struck the same few inches of barrier over and over again, he saw bits of gold flake away, revealing a tiny crack. He smirked, focusing his magic to hit harder and faster. So much for the scary stories. Her people might have been glorifying her as some kind of mighty sorceress, but she was just another stupid human, witch or not. She'd raised her other hand to reinforce the spell, but more and more cracks were forming.
You're boned,
he thought, chuckling to himself. Still, as he watched and waited for the golden light to shatter, he had to feel some grudging admiration. Most of the magic-wielding humans he'd killed were big, blustery men, and none of them had lasted half as long as this scrawny female. What kind of soul did the witch have, anyway? He'd seen just about every color there was, and figured she was stubborn enough to be purple, or maybe a patient cyan, or even orange for bravery. After all, he was throwing out everything he had, and she wasn't backing down. The skeleton squinted at her through the barrier, searching for the telltale spark of, there it was. There it was. For the second time, Sans looked at her and knew instantly that he was boned. Despite the ferocity of his attacks, the cracks in the barrier were starting to fill themselves in, and the air crackled with another surge of her magic. A merry little chorus of rang in his head as he stared at her blazing red soul, and it only got louder when he remembered what that color meant. Determination. It didn't matter that she was just a human. His desire to kill her was nothing compared to her will to live. As the bones he conjured came slower and weaker, dissolving as they hit the barrier, Sans knew with horrible certainty that he wasn't going to win. The stories had to be true after all. Unless the priestess got careless and he could either kill her or use a shortcut, he was going to have to do whatever she wanted for as long as she said. But maybe if he caught her off guard. Sans let his arm drop. The last few bones clattered to the floor and he sank to his knees, head bowed. Behind the high priestess, the men all breathed a sigh of relief. To her credit, the woman didn't let the spell go. She poked her head through for a better look at him, motioned to the guards to stay where they were, and knelt in front of the massive skeleton, halfway inside the barrier.
I'm not surprised that you wanted to escape. I can almost excuse you for trying.
Her voice was calm enough, and as far as he could tell with her veil on, her face was still expressionless. He would have bought it if he hadn't noticed her hands clenching in her lap.
Almost?
The skeleton asked, head still lowered, eyes fixed on her.
Almost.
He shrugged, watching her knuckles turn white.
I guess that's why you're the High Priestess, huh?
It is. None of my magic is stolen.
Of course not. Our power's no good in barriers. We ain't that stubborn. Or that dumb.
My offer stands. Do you have any questions or conditions you'd like to propose?
Sans glanced at her headdress. The spikes atop it dipped in and out of the golden curtain as her head drooped. She had to have expended most of her power holding him off. After several days with no food or sleep, and then wasting all that effort on the barrier, he was pretty worn out himself. Too bad monsters couldn't take a human's magic. Just her soul. It took all his self-control not to jump to his feet in excitement. Why the hell hadn't he thought of that? An ordinary monster who absorbed an ordinary human soul was supposed to grow incredibly powerful. What would happen if a boss monster gained all the power of a gifted and highly determined witch? The High Priestess shook herself and sat up straighter.
Please answer me, Sans. I don't think either of us wants to go through that again.
No.
He admitted, shifting his weight back, edging toward the wall. Sure enough, she unconsciously moved closer, a few more inches into the cell.
I do have one question,
he said, moving back again. The woman frowned, scooting almost all the way out of the barrier.
What is it?
He slowly, delicately reached down and tapped on her headdress, gentle as a light breeze.
Mind if I get a better look at you?
The priestess started. For the first time, she seemed uncertain. She frowned, and as her mouth opened again, Sans lunged at her. There was no question of her ducking behind the barrier in time. Before she even knew that he'd moved, one of the skeleton's hands had closed around her torso and lifted her as easily as a child holding a doll. The barrier vanished behind her, and Sans said casually,
Heal, or I'll stomp her like a grape.
The guards froze in the act of drawing their swords. The priestess started to say something, but he flexed his hand ever so slightly, and she stopped. Sans smiled. He considered her for a moment, wondering if he should crush her anyway and squeeze her out slowly in front of the guardsmen, the way humans drained a monster's magic. It was tempting, and would be kind of poetic, but he decided he'd better not. He didn't want to damage her soul. Besides, she'd put up a hell of a fight. If anyone deserved a quick death, it was
Sans.
To his astonishment, she worked her arm out over his fingers and rested her hand on his knuckle.
Please.
Normally, he would have laughed at a human begging him for mercy, but this didn't feel like begging. She was just looking at him, calmly. No, the crazy bitch wasn't asking. She was telling. She was distressed, but expectant, as if she was just waiting for him to put her down and apologize. He should have squished her or bashed her against the wall for that. But somehow, as the veiled priestess stared into the fire of his eye sockets, the idea of breaking her didn't seem much fun anymore. Her head lowered and tipped to one side, and all of a sudden, it was like his mind, his memory, got pulled sideways. As he stared back at her, he was no longer facing a mortal enemy. He was back in a moment he thought he'd forgotten, standing in front of his house in Snowdon. A tiny human in a striped shirt was holding his hand and smiling up at him with perfect, stupid trust, and he knew that however much he despised humanity, he could never hate this kid, any more than he could reach up and stop the sun in its orbit. Why did he have to think of it now, when he needed all the homicidal energy he could muster? With a painful effort, Sans tore himself away from that memory, back to the present and the woman in his hand. The skeleton growled, starting under his breath and working up to a snarl that reverberated through the stone walls. To hell with her. To hell with all of them. Lack of space was a definite issue, but Sans prided himself on adaptability. He extended his arm to its full length, nearly shoving her into the frightened guards, which gave him enough room to materialize a single blaster. It was much smaller than usual, and that was fine, because it'd concentrate the last of his power into one good shot. The skull shone an incandescent red, eyes aflame and fangs glinting in its own light, literally nose to nose with the High Priestess. Sans let his rage and frustration rise like a tide of pure filth, distantly surprised that he could still feel some grief beneath it all, and the blaster's mouth creaked open from the pressure building in its throat. The priestess had pulled herself upright with her free arm. The scarlet luminescence was right up against her eyes, but she screwed them shut and leaned forward, face set with determination. In his haste to align the blast and hit all the humans at once, Sans didn't hear anything unusual. He didn't even notice when the light dimmed just a little, or that the pressure had stopped rising. But then a shock ran through him, like a hand grabbing his soul, and he jerked out of his concentration to see and feel the woman stroking the blaster's nose as if it were an overexcited puppy.
It's all right.
She said, so low that he barely heard her.
Please, stop. It'll be all right, I promise.
And he'd be damned if the giant skull wasn't closing its mouth and leaning into her hand. No one had actually touched one of his blasters before. They were long-distance weapons, and he used them as such, only getting close when it was fun or strategic to do so. His first reaction was horrified indignation. He might be about to vaporize her, but for crap's sake, he wasn't being inappropriate. As she kept petting, though, she leaned in and rested her forehead on the skull's lower jaw, and the skeleton felt an alien sensation steal over him, something he didn't recognize at first. The light dimmed further, the skull's jaws drifted shut. For the first time, Sans heard a soft, rich sound. It was the woman humming to herself, or to the blaster, as if trying to soothe it. And it was working. Sans felt as if he'd been drugged, with a sense of peace? Was that it? Yes. It was absolute peace washing over him, relaxing his grip so that the young woman had to catch herself before she fell out of it. She might have been smiling faintly beneath the veil, but he couldn't focus enough to tell. He wondered if it was the same magic that had made him think of Chris, a distraction to save herself and kill him before he attacked again. No, he wasn't drugged or under some kind of spell. Sans remembered feeling this way when he was a lot younger, and a couple times during the humans' last visit to the underground, when he and Pap discovered that at least one human was worth something. Of course, then they'd lost him, and there were no more humans worth anything. It never failed to amaze him. They'd had less than a month together, but all these years later he still missed the little bastard so much that it hurt. Luckily, the pain didn't last. The woman kept humming, and Sans grew less and less angry. The blaster made a kind of purring sound and vanished. At the same time, Sans' arm fell, releasing the priestess, allowing her guards to rush in and pull her away. The boss monster gazed at the angry humans with total detachment, scratching the back of his head as he yawned. She'd won.
You win.
Are you all right, my lady?
Demanded the captain, helping her sit down against the wall. The humming had stopped. The young woman rubbed her eyes, keeping them shut.
Don't kill him, please.
Was all she said. Sans closed his eyes, too. The humans were conferring in rapid whispers on what to do with him, but he didn't care anymore. It was almost a relief when they stepped back. A couple of them grunted with effort, and something crashed into his skull, knocking him out. Over a day later, the High Priestess shut the outer door to her chambers, whistling to herself. She set a covered tray on the table, sat down at her mirror, and checked that her eyes were clear, or at least not so puffy anymore. Then she picked up her veil and headdress and settled them over her head. She stared at her reflection for a full minute, as if waiting for the woman in the mirror to get up first. With a sigh, she finally pushed herself to her feet. Just outside her bedroom, she let the whistle peter out into a thread of magic that ran ahead to check the loose barriers she'd set around the bed. 2 echoes came back, one very close by.
Good morning. Please step back,
She said into the slight crack in the door. A pause, then a soft creak of floorboards, unnervingly quiet for someone his size.
Further, please.
She ordered. He made a noise she couldn't interpret. Floorboards creaked again, and the bed frame groaned under his weight. The priestess turned the doorknob, picked up the tray, and elbowed the door open. Sans was sitting on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees. He had opened the windows, and in the early daylight he looked even more menacing. The light shone through his filthy shirt, shadowing the spaces between his ribs. The young woman made herself place the tray on a side table and pull up a chair with perfect unconcern, as if she couldn't feel him staring her down.
I see you're all healed. You must have slept well. I know I did.
The skeleton glanced behind him at the rumpled sheets.
You were alone the whole time.
The priestess hastened to assure him.
There's a very comfortable couch in my office that I've been using.
Your office, huh?
Sans stretched his arms out over his head, bones clicking softly as he rolled his neck around.
Pretty nice setup you got here. What is this, silk? Real feathers?
She inclined her head.
I would have removed you from your cell much sooner if I'd known you were there. No one told me until Duke Archibald asked me to help select your new owner, which, no, I am not.
She grimaced.
May I ask how you were caught? You're certainly capable of defending yourself.
Sans didn't answer. The young woman was thinking of what else to say when he grunted and turned to stretch back out on the bed, splaying his limbs across the huge mattress.
This is the most comfortable place I've ever slept. You know that?
Me too,
she said before she could stop herself. Sans glanced up, as if wondering whether he'd seen a glimpse of personality, and she cleared her throat.
Is it the same reason you made no attempt to break out of your cell for 3 days?
Got caught trying to steal some grain. Not a lot of food in the underground these days. I hadn't had anything for a while, so I was weak as hell.
You refused to eat anything while you were imprisoned,
she pointed out. He shrugged.
I figured it was poisoned or drugged or some shit. Humans don't get their mitts on a boss monster every day, but you can't have 5 sorcerers watching me every second. Feeding me some kind of crap like that would be the easiest thing to do.
That didn't feel quite right, but without more evidence, the priestess decided to leave it alone for now. Instead, she pulled the side table closer and removed the tray's cover. Sans twitched at the sight of steaming hotcakes, piles of cheese-sprinkled eggs, tomatoes, and crisp-crusted sausage links. The priestess cut a tomato slice into quarters with her fork, speared one, and, with the ease of long practice, took hold of her veil between 2 fingers and lifted it long enough to get the fork to her mouth, dropping it as she put the fork down.
Seriously? Just take the damn thing off,
the skeleton remarked, sitting up. The young woman made a show of chewing, swallowing, and lifting another tomato to her mouth. He didn't have a stomach, but if he had, she probably would have heard it growling. He was shifting around and scowling, clearly agitated. So she quickened her pace, taking a huge bite of egg, a chunk of hotcake, and a sausage in turn, eating as fast as she could. Sans' eyes had lit to orange again, and the priestess was glad to put the fork down.
There. You see, it isn't poisoned,
she said briskly. She stood and pushed the side table over to the bed.
Help yourself.
The orange faded. His skull tilted this way and that, like a wary but curious animal.
What?
I had breakfast over an hour ago. This is for you.
He glanced at the tray, then back to her. She waited for a full 10 seconds, almost holding her breath, before she was rewarded with a rude noise.
Huh. Can I have another fork? Don't want your germs.
The priestess knew when she was being tested. She picked up the fork. She went to the nightstand and the pitcher of water standing ready and dunked the fork in, swishing vigorously.
Here, but first, I'd like to get a few things straight.
she said, holding up the dripping utensil. He didn't move. A moment later, she felt a tug on the fork and instantly snapped the connection by raising another barrier.
No cheating,
She reproved him.
I'm cheating?
The skeleton banged his fist on the bedpost.
How the hell are you doing this? I'm not dumb, lady. You can't just slap a barrier on something that blocks every kind of magic. I can't get out of here. I can't go blue. You did some weird crap to my poor blaster.
I helped you calm down. You've been asleep for 26 hours, by the way.
He stopped dead, but only for a second.
Yeah? Well, how do you know so damn much about what I can do? If I'd known this was gonna happen, I'd have left a long time ago.
And yet you didn't.
The woman crossed her arms, keeping the fork pointed away from him.
I don't believe you were too weak to remove yourself from this situation, Sans. We all have our secrets, and I don't mind that. But I need to know that you won't take drastic measures before we've completed our arrangement.
There is no arrangement, witch. I'll make you a deal, okay? Forget this apprentice crap. Let me go now, and I won't kill anyone on my way out. How's that?
She tapped the fork on the pitcher's handle.
Your people possess almost no farmland, and the area we've left you has notoriously poor soil. Did you know there are several potions, all made from common ingredients, that could double your crop yields in the space of a few years?
Sans started.
No, and I don't care.
You should. There are also potions that can heal wounds, preserve foodstuffs, and send you to sleep with no ill effects using only the tiniest bit of magic. Do you mean to tell me that monsters need none of these things?
The skeleton looked at her warily. She could almost see him thinking. His rough speech and rougher appearance didn't fool her. He was at least as intelligent as she was, and likely cared enough to want to hear more.
So, I learn all this fantastic secret knowledge, and you get...
Insight. Humans have been fighting monsters for centuries, and the more we know about you...
His eyes flamed.
The easier it is to kill us? You seriously think I'm gonna...
The easier if we can stop dying!
She snarled, her anger suddenly flaring right back at him. The boss monster's eyes went blank with astonishment. She took a long, deep breath that did not help at all.
Believe me or not, Sans, when I say that I want to make peace for everyone's sake. I am tired of hearing every unsolved crime and evil thought blamed on monsters. I am tired of arguing with sorcerers who want to seal the entrance to the underground and let you starve to death so that we don't have to talk about it anymore. I am tired of mediating disputes over monster ownership, as if we had any right to help ourselves to other sentient beings, and I'm sick to death knowing where our magic comes from and being unable to stop it.
She was almost panting now, gripping the fork like a trident. Sans was staring at her like she'd grown another head. She swallowed and lowered the fork. For want of something peaceful to do, she dipped it back into the pitcher for more swishing.
Monsters are not completely blameless, but you are outnumbered by a much crueler and stronger race, and we've taken that advantage too far. It has to change, Sans, but we cannot do anything until we learn to talk to each other again.
Sans' teeth ground together.
Have you ever read a history book? You know what happened the last time we had humans over to play?
The priestess stared at a spot on the wall. Sans looked up in alarm as the barriers surged in and out of visibility, hissing softly.
Yes,
She said, and went on, reciting from memory.
several people were killed in an explosion caused by faulty stage effects at a farewell gala for the human delegation, most notably Prince Azrael of the monster race. Though the exact cause of this unfortunate accident remains unclear, its scope and destructive power were hallmarks of human magic, leading to accusations of sabotage and assassination from both sides. War was prevented solely by the will of Queen Toriel, who was devastated by the loss of her son and adoptive daughter, but nevertheless prevented her husband from executing the remaining humans. The delegation was permitted to leave, and in exchange, humans promised the underground would never be sealed.
Okay, then. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Sans rubbed the back of his neck, scratching between the vertebrae.
Knowing that, you still think you could teach me a bunch of stuff, turn me loose, and make everything all better?
No. but I can try.
On impulse, the priestess knelt, looking up at him and hoping the effect wasn't spoiled by the dirty fork.
Sans, give me 1 month. That's all I ask. You can have copies of any recipe you need to take back with you, and I'll show you the techniques to make them work properly. You won't have much freedom of movement, but you won't be kept in a cell either.
She glanced at the feather mattress and added,
You can keep the bed for yourself. As luxurious as it is, I feel lost in it.
He didn't laugh, but he didn't sneer at her either. His eyes went from the fork to the bedpost, the canopy, the bookshelves lining the walls by the fireplace, and back to her face.
I need some time to think about it. What happens if I don't wanna?
Her magic crackled in the air again, and she winced, trying to calm down.
I'd rather not say, but I think you know the answer. Remember, I'm not the only human who can use barriers.
He did not like that, and she couldn't blame him. She looked down at the fork in her hand.
You should eat now,
she said lamely, and held it out to him, handle first, praying she had judged correctly. The skeleton's face was impossible to read. Now that it was quiet, it reminded her too much of when he'd grabbed her in the cell. Her instinct screamed at her to pull her hand back and throw a barrier between them, but determination surged as she remembered how she'd already faced down his attempts to kill her. She was going to forge a lasting bond between their worlds and hand him a kitchen utensil like a normal person, or die trying. Slowly, Sans reached down, and she fought to keep from panicking as his massive hand approached hers. He paused, and plucked the fork from her grip with delicate courtesy, holding it up between them.
Too small. Still dirty.
He tossed it back onto her lap. She stared at the fork. She stared at him. She stood up, dropped the fork into the pitcher, and plunged her hand in after it. Out came the utensil. She turned her back to him, and with one swift motion, off came her veil. As High Priestess, she wore it for most of her waking hours, which meant she'd learned to whip it off without even disturbing her headdress, the way she'd once seen someone yank a tablecloth out from beneath a set of dishes. And as High Priestess, if she wanted to use her sacred veil to dry a mostly clean fork in order to please a giant monster who was intimidating her and somehow also being a complete snot, then who was going to stop her? No one. That was exactly who. With a righteous huff, she turned back around, still polishing the bedamned fork.
Here,
she said, facing him for the first time.
I hope this is satisfactory.
Sans looked at her. He didn't say anything. The world always seemed a little too bright when she just had the veil on, and the light from the window was in her eyes. She rubbed them on her sleeve and tucked a strand of short brown hair behind her ear.
Well?
She demanded. Sans didn't take it. He was leaning forward, hand dangling, as if he'd started to reach for it and somehow forgotten what he was doing. His sockets were blank, an odd color washing over his bony face.
It's...
The priestess didn't know that could be a complete sentence. It probably wasn't, she thought in growing irritation.
Sans, are you going to use this, or would you like to eat with your hands?
The skeleton shook himself and turned away.
Never mind. Not hungry.
She bit back the urge to call him a colorful name or two.
Sans, this is not a joke. There is nothing wrong with your food except that it's cold. Eat it. Please.
Sans hunched his shoulders.
I will. Just give me a couple of minutes.
She did not have the time or patience for this.
Sans, look at this.
He glanced at her, and in one motion, she stabbed a sausage and another chunk of hotcake.
Say ah,
she ordered, and when he blankly repeated, she thrust the fork into his
Order!
mouth. Sans nearly choked, demanding,
Order!
before he swallowed it whole. The priestess was fascinated to not see anything past his throat, though she knew he had eaten it.
What the fuck, lady?
He clarified.
I am not lady, thank you. And I know you know better words than that.
She said sternly, putting the fork back on the tray.
It's not my fault if it got cold.
I don't care how hot or cold something is, lady. You didn't give me a chance to get my tongue out, so it's all the same to me.
The boss monster answered her puzzled look by concentrating, then opening his mouth and pointing.
Hey?
Good God, he suddenly did have a small, floppy red tongue. She flapped her hand at him, face burning.
All right, I believe you. Put it away.
He did, and she was relieved to see nothing but a mouthful of giant fangs.
So, if I'm not supposed to call you lady, what's your name?
The priestess blinked. No one had asked her that in a long, long time.
Well, if you don't like my lady, there's always your eminence. Or my ceremonial name, Thea.
It occurred to her that he was probably not going to react well to any of her suggestions, but she soldiered on.
You could just say High Priestess, though that's a mouthful. At the convent, they gave each of us a different saint's name, and I was...
Sans held up his hands.
Okay, that sounds peachy. But what is your actual damn name?
She grasped her skirt so hard that her nails dug into her palms through the thick velvet folds.
My name is Frisk.
Sans' eyes were blank again.
Huh. No wonder. Well, nice to meet you, Frisk.
He raised a hand. It was a blatant lie, but cordially given, so she attempted a smile in return.
It's nice to meet you too, Sans.
For some reason, that seemed to alarm him. He drew back, then suddenly grabbed the tray, tipped his head back, and dumped the entire contents into his mouth. He had no cheeks, but his face somehow looked very full before he swallowed it all, dropping the tray on the floor.
There. Where's the bathroom?
Frisk realized her mouth was hanging open, and shut it.
It's, why do you ask? You're a skeleton.
Right.
He scuffed the bones of his foot on the carpet.
Oh, look at this! Fork, yes!
Sure enough, he'd found the fork. She scooped it up, setting it on the table, and out of nowhere, the priestess felt a real smile lift the corners of her mouth.
Just in times.
The words hung in the air for a long moment. Frisk was beginning to feel stupid when Sans smacked his thigh bone and gave a shout of laughter.
I'll be damned. You got the point.
It's food for thought.
She said, and grinned as he doubled over.
I'm sorry, please fork give me?
Just like that, she thought distantly. Yesterday, the day before, she'd fought for her life against a boss monster who interpreted her overtures as a deadly threat, and now they were giggling in her room like drunken schoolgirls. Was this going to work after all? Was this how real peace began, with awkward silence and stupid puns? If not, Frisk could always console herself that this was the most she'd laughed in years. Sans was not wondering the same thing. He was thinking how he'd woken up not knowing where he was, and had had to figure out that he wasn't dreaming about the battle in his cell. A human witch really had trapped him and knocked him out with some kind of weird brain magic. Once he got over the fact that he couldn't take any shortcuts and wouldn't fit through the windows, though, he had to admit things could be worse. The bed really was the most comfortable thing in the world. Talking with the witch was not comfortable. It was bad enough when she was asking him questions about his capture and not breaking out of prison, but then she had to give him food and say things that made sense, and things that made even more sense, and then... He'd never understood why human men made such a huge fuss over women. Monsters came in so many shapes and sizes that anything was possible. The inside really did count more than the outside, except maybe when it came to reproduction. But that was a rare occasion for monsters, who thought that the human's obsession with it was shallow and weird at best. Sans, in particular, had no interest in the human form unless he was trying to destroy it. They were all just skeletons with varying degrees of hair, meat, and fluids in the way. And then that infuriating woman had turned around in the sunlight, veil and stupid fork in hand, and he suddenly couldn't breathe. The overall picture was what made him feel a huge mess of feelings he didn't like or understand, but he could see every detail perfectly. Her lips pursed in annoyance, the sun reflecting off that black circlet thing. Chestnut hair shining and reddish-brown eyes half-closed against the light. Her dress was still dark, but today it was a looser, white-laced style, shoulders partly hidden under some kind of sheer material that ended high up on her neck. And then she had turned her head and done something with her hair, and now he couldn't think things right. All he could try to do was turn away, then eat it all in order to make her go away, and only his punning instinct had saved him from saying or doing anything else stupid. Why did she have to like puns, too? This was bad. It had gotten very complicated very fast. He had to get out of here. She demonstrated some emotion behind her priestessy facade, Maybe he could appeal to it, persuade her to take some other monster under her wing, and... wow. Speaking of wings, as she laughed, he happened to look down at her from a different angle, and she had a really nice rack. It was hard to see under such dark clothes, but they accentuated the graceful outline of neck and shoulder perfectly. Under the sheer material, her collarbone was...
Going to do it.
She was saying, wiping away tears of laughter.
I'm not all-powerful, but I have enough influence at court and with the church to guarantee your safety.
Frisk looked up at him, bright-eyed, and his soul did another loop-de-loop.
So, Sans, will you stay?
He didn't want to. It was a bad idea, and he said no in his mind. She smiled. Chapter 2. Escape. 3 nights later, Sans woke with a jerk. Someone in the next room was sobbing. It wasn't a memory or a nightmare, he realized a moment later, and it wasn't the priestess. It was a small child, crying so hard that it could barely breathe. Steeling himself, the boss monster slid out of bed and listened intently. He heard a woman whisper something, and the child's sobs quieted as a familiar sound came through the door. It was the same humming that had depowered his blaster the other day, though not the same tune. The skeleton took a moment to be sure that the glow in his eyes was out, then cracked the bedroom door open. Frisk was kneeling, bareheaded, with her arms around a little boy of perhaps 8 or 9 years. In the light of one lamp on the work table, Sans saw a dark patch of blood in the child's hair. Frisk glanced at the skeleton, giving him a wan smile, still humming. Sans closed the door enough that the child wouldn't see him. The priestess waited till the boy had calmed down to the occasional sniffle, then leaned back and reached for something on the table.
I've got a treat for you,
she said cheerfully.
Do you like peppermint?
The child thought it over and nodded.
Wonderful, because that's exactly what this is. You'll feel better in no time.
She held out a glass bottle.
You can have 3 big swallows, but only 3, all right?
Well played, Sans thought, framing it as something he got to have, not something he had to take. Sure enough, the little boy gulped it right down, smacking his lips as the young woman retrieved the bottle.
Good. Can you do something very important for me?
She asked. The child nodded.
Can you lie down and count to 100? That'll make the magic work better. Let's go to my office.
The child went with her quite willingly. After a few minutes, the High Priestess re-emerged into Sans' field of vision. Her pleasant expression was gone, replaced with one that actually made him feel a little sorry for whoever had pissed her off. Then he remembered the blood on the kid's head.
Anybody you want me to kill?
He asked through the door.
Don't tempt me.
Frisk jerked a sheet of paper from a stack on the desk, grabbed a pen, and began writing rapidly. Sans checked the time.
God damn. What's that kid doing awake at 2 in the morning?
Being beaten.
The pen scratched viciously across the page. She began whistling again. Viciously. He decided to shut up. Frisk soon finished the message, blew the ink dry, and folded the paper in thirds, then sealed it and marched to the outer door, where she woke up the guard on duty. Sans heard her reaming the guy about doing his job properly, serving a writ, and not letting a guy out of the castle. She came back in, only to return to the office. This seemed to be typical for her, as far as Sans could tell, though it usually wasn't this dramatic or this late at night. If she wasn't off at church or giving him lessons, she was talking to someone who needed help and apparently couldn't get it elsewhere. He had yet to see her do something for fun or sleep more than 5 hours at a time. Meanwhile, his daily routine had been surprisingly low-key. The first day, after being flagrantly mind-controlled into agreeing to stay, he'd eaten some more, then slept for another dreamless 24 hours. The next morning, she'd let him have another pile of food, then started his apprenticeship by showing him the most common ingredients for potions and how to identify them by sight, as he couldn't smell and didn't have much sense of touch. Yesterday had been a review, emphasizing that a mistake could literally kill someone, and she'd given him a book of basic recipes, asking him to make a list of any ingredients he found that she hadn't already introduced. It was kind of annoying to have homework, and he was starting to get cabin fever, but otherwise, the whole experience hadn't been too terrible. He was relieved and disappointed that she kept the veil on almost all the time, which reduced the distractions somewhat, though she persisted in having a fantastic shape, and he was really starting to enjoy the sound of her voice. He didn't even mind the constant humming or whistling anymore, except when he felt the barriers pulse in time with whatever she was doing, and realized that she was strengthening them every so often. But when he could focus enough to ask questions, she was patient and encouraging, and let him use all the paper he wanted to write down the answers. She was obviously pleased that he cared enough to take notes, though not in a smug or irritating way. It just made her happy, and that made him not unhappy. It was also still novel to talk to a human who wasn't afraid of him. He hadn't seen many humans up here besides the little boy, and figured they were forbidden to come into her rooms unless they desperately needed help or could sneak past a sleeping guard. That was fine with Sans, though he'd overheard one cleaning lady being so persistent that he really wanted to come out of the bedroom and tell her to piss off. Unsurprisingly, Frisk had asked him to not do that. There were only a few real mysteries so far. One was a pile of letters she'd brought in on the second day and tossed into a basket of also unopened envelopes standing by the roaring fireplace in her workshop. He'd caught her looking at the basket a couple times, as if debating whether to burn them all, but she never did it or opened any in front of him. The biggest question was how she knew he could teleport and the nature of his blue magic, even if it was getting more red than blue these days. He had unthinkingly used the ladder to grab a couple things yesterday, and his magic had almost immediately died out. He didn't know exactly how she was doing it, but her barriers weren't just blocking him in. They kept his power so muted that he couldn't have summoned a single bone. It seemed that he'd be allowed to use some magic to make the actual potions, and that was it. Well, there was time to worry about that later. The injured kid had made him think of Chris again, which made him think of the book passage Frisk had quoted at him. He'd have to ask if she... Wait, no, he didn't have to ask. She'd given him carte blanche to read anything he found in her bedroom or workshop. Sans tapped the nearest witchlight on, noting that it was much weaker than the ones underground, and started perusing the shelves. 15 minutes later, Frisk knocked on the door, waiting for him to grunt acknowledgement before she came in.
I'm sorry for waking you,
she said, dropping into her chair with a deep sigh.
There's going to be hell to pay in the morning.
She did look like hell, with bags under her eyes and a smear of blood on her cheek. Sans put the book down and tapped his own face, and she got the hint, rubbing her cheek with the back of her hand.
Ugh, that poor child.
She sighed again, curling up and resting her head on the arm of the chair.
I'll wash up in a minute.
Didn't you just get back from a thing?
He asked, wondering if she was always this cavalier about bodily fluids.
Yes. His Holiness decided we needed more midnight services, and I have to be there every other night.
She rubbed her eyes.
Flynn must have followed me back here. People aren't supposed to know where I live, but word is spreading. At this rate, I'll have to move again.
Sans drummed his fingertips on the bedpost. She'd found an oversized stool to use in the workshop, but there were no armchairs big enough for him, so he spent most of his leisure time on the bed.
Being High Priestess sucks. How long you been at it?
3 years. The last they was assassinated, and they had to find a replacement as fast as possible. Out of all the minor priestesses available, I was the only one who passed all the tests. It's been instructive.
That didn't surprise him. A human strong enough to block a boss monster's focused attack had to be pretty rare.
How old are you anyway?
He asked, suddenly curious. Her eyes shut.
22. I was educated in a convent, ordained at 16, high priestess at 19.
A mighty yawn was partly hidden in her arm.
Lucky me.
Sans didn't know much about humans, but he was pretty sure that was young as hell for so much responsibility. The problem was that she was good enough to handle it, which meant they'd pile on more and more until she went nuts.
Nah, sucks to be you. Any way you can get out of it?
Well,
She mumbled, eyes still closed.
I can die. Or marry. Or go back to the convent and become the Mother Superior, which would also be until I die. The Feast of All Souls is next week. That's when the last High Priestess was murdered.
Something prickled up Sans' spine.
You spend all your time doing church stuff, kissing babies and healing puppies or whatever. Why the hell would anyone want to kill you?
I meant it when I said I have influence in the church and at court. I don't hate monsters, which is inconvenient for several people, and I'm not quiet about it, which is extremely inconvenient for many more of them. Besides, my natural father is very wealthy, and his other children—
Natural father? What, do some humans have unnatural kids?
Her eyes opened. She looked lovely in the soft light, but troubled and sad, so much that he wished he hadn't asked.
I'm illegitimate. My father never married my mother, and our life was bad. Very hard for a very long time.
The priestess rubbed her fingertips together, as if seeing more dried blood.
He was a very busy man, but he only has one legitimate heir. After his second wife died, he started tracking down his children born out of wedlock. And it's an open secret that he'll leave each of us a large amount after he passes.
And whoever's left gets a bigger piece of the pie?
Exactly. As far as I know, there were 14 or 15 of us, but magic runs in his side of the family, and most of his children became sorcerers. Almost all of my half-brothers have been killed fighting monsters. 2 of my half-sisters blew up in an experiment that went wrong. There are only 6 of us left, including his heir.
Sans' eyes narrowed.
What is it with humans and exploding stuff by accident?
He couldn't read the look on her face.
If we knew the answer to that, history would have taken a much better course.
Of course, that made him think of Chris again. It seemed pretty inevitable, so he might as well ask.
I don't suppose there's a record of the humans who went to the underground on that last trip. Maybe what happened to them after they got back?
Frisk raised her head a little.
That depends. We know exactly which nobles, sorcerers, and other dignitaries attended. Do you mean one of them?
Nah, this was a servant, I think. Probably. I don't know.
The skeleton felt his eyes lighting up again.
He was only 4 or 5. Just coming up on 13 years ago, so he'd be a grown-up by now.
The priestess frowned.
No one that young was in attendance, so far as I know, and I've read every account I could find. May I ask why you want to know?
Nah,
Sans flexed his hand around the bedpost.
forget it.
Frisk sighed, carving a design into the plush chair with her thumbnail.
Well, I'm afraid the answer is no. There's no record of the servants who came along, except the ones who were killed, and that didn't include any children. You'd have to check with each of the—
She sat up.
Wait, I know someone who was there. My mother. Do you want me to ask her?
Hell yes, I do.
Sans' hand tightened, splintering the bedpost. He guiltily released it.
Did she talk much about it? What all did she tell you? Can I ask her a couple of things?
The priestess laughed, quieting him with a wave of her hand.
Sans, please. She's been very sick recently, and I don't want to excite her too much. I will ask her anything you need to know, thank you. And yes, she talked about it to anyone who would listen. She's the one who told me all about monsters and what you're actually like.
Sans sat forward, but she forestalled more questions with another gesture.
First, her name is Rosa. Did you ever meet her?
It did sound familiar.
I think so. Little, blonde, wore the hair up.
That's her. She would have been in charge of any children they brought along, but she never mentioned any of them to me.
Frisk tapped her finger on the chair arm.
She did say there were things she wasn't allowed to talk about. She worked for the Duke as a nurse, and she would never disobey him.
He wondered for a moment if that meant the guy was Frisk's father, but was too excited to dwell on it.
What'd she say about us?
Well, she didn't talk very much with individual monsters, but she said the Queen was very kind, and made sure to tell each of the humans how glad she was to have them visit. The King was also very courteous. He tried his best not to frighten anyone, and he thought it was rude that the servants weren't allowed to eat with the nobles.
Sans' foot started tapping. She raised an eyebrow at him, and he reluctantly stopped.
Who else?
The next moment, they both heard the office door open into the workshop.
Miss?
Frisk was at the bedroom door in an instant.
What is it, Flynn?
She closed the door most of the way. Damn it all to hell. Sans grumpily listened to the child explain that he'd scratched his head, and sorry, there was blood on the couch now. Frisk explained that wounds got itchy as they healed, and to please not scratch it, and that it would be much better to wipe his hands on the towel she'd put down than on the furniture. Then he had to be cleaned up again, and a bigger bandage applied, and someone was sent for to take the boy somewhere he could sleep safely. A thought stabbed at him as he listened to the proceedings. That was how she knew he could teleport and zip things around without touching them. King Asgore had insisted the monsters show off their powers in various amusing ways so that the humans would be less afraid of their magic. Sans thought it was a bad idea at the time, and look what came of it. Frisk eventually came back to the bedroom, drying her hands on her skirt.
Let's cut to the chase.
Sans said quietly as she sat down.
Did she tell you about any skeletons?
Yes.
Frisk folded her hands and looked straight at him.
2 brothers. Sans and Papyrus.
Sans laced his fingers together to avoid accidentally destroying anything else.
And...
She liked them very much, especially Papyrus. Sans was friendly, but she said he watched their every move and it made them nervous. Papyrus was a joy to be around. He was very full of himself, but there wasn't a mean bone in his body, and he considered it his duty to welcome the humans as much as possible. My mother talked about him more than any other monster. Apparently his spaghetti was terrible.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Frisk looked at him sharply.
I wanted to ask you about that, but are you all right?
Sans couldn't answer. He'd avoided thinking too much about home, especially the fact that he'd already been gone for a week when he got caught. It had been easy to tell himself that he could always bust out of here if he needed to, or that the lady would let him send a message, or even go have a quick visit before coming back here. But...
Are you Papyrus's brother?
Yeah.
The priestess shook her head.
I don't understand. Mother said that Sans was shorter than any of the humans who came to the underground, and the only boss monsters mentioned in the official histories are Asgore and Toriel. Can you tell me what happened? I wasn't sure if you were the same skeleton. You seem so different.
A lot of shit happens, that's what.
Sans lurched to his feet, and she had to tip her head back to look up at him. His sockets were glowing again.
You know what? I'm tired. And you look like crap. Time for night-night.
He jerked the door open, rattling the hinges.
Good luck cleaning up. Blood's a bitch to get out. Trust me, I know.
She rose quietly, folding her hands in the style he recognized from the very first time he'd seen her.
All right, then. Good night, Sans,
she said, and walked past him out of the room. He didn't slam the door shut behind her, but it was pretty close. Once she had control of herself again, Frisk wiped her eyes and resumed scrubbing the couch. She kept glancing underneath it, and as she threw yet another towel into the laundry basket, she decided,
to hell with it,
and pulled the couch aside. A nearly invisible seam in the floor showed where a board could be pried up to access her hidden safe. There was no lid, no lock, and no key, just a solid golden film that vanished when she pressed her thumb into its center. The High Priestess surveyed the contents. Several tight-folded papers, a bag of high-value dinar, a sack of silver ingots, a few pieces of jewelry, and a small box. She selected the box and removed its rosewood lid to reveal a tiny glass orb, something swirling around on its surface like smoke. She stared at it for so long that her knees began aching, but she didn't notice. Her vision blurred again, and she jammed the lid back on the little box, shoving everything back into the safe, resealing it, thumping the floorboard into place, and pushing the couch back. Not today, she told herself fiercely. She didn't care what Sans said or how he acted. It couldn't be worth it. Nothing could. The next day, after a late breakfast, Frisk quizzed him on the differences between various herbs and powdered animal bits and their uses. They looked over the list he'd made of new ingredients, going through the recipes and identifying how each item worked in each potion. That was the first time she demonstrated how to mix and infuse something, and the first time she warned him,
You have to be careful how you feel when you make potions. Intent is always important when you're using magic. You fully intend to cause damage, and I fully intend to protect, which is why we're good at what we do, yes?
He shrugged philosophically, and she half smiled.
Well, it's similar when you're making something for someone else to take. If you're in a foul mood and you want to cause harm, or you simply don't want the person to get better, you might as well be concocting poison, or giving them water. Of course, your feelings don't matter if you're just throwing herbs into a pot, but these work as well as they do because you're putting a tiny bit of yourself into it. You have to make sure that it's a good bit.
Pretty sure all my bits are bad by now.
Sans remarked.
How about I make some poison instead?
Frisk shook her head, leaning over the table.
No one is all bad, Sans. Here.
She took the glass stirrer out of the miniature cauldron bubbling away in the middle of their workspace.
I'll infuse it now. Watch.
He did observe closely as she bent forward, though probably not the way she'd intended. He just made sure he was looking at the potion when she glanced up at him.
Try thinking of someone you care for, and imagine it's for them.
She opened her hand over the cauldron and, to his surprise, let out a low whistle, piercingly sweet. A mote of light drifted from her palm and settled into the mixture. It seemed to sparkle for a moment, then resumed being a potion. When he concentrated, though, he could feel a little tingle of magic in it.
I won't ask you to try until you have better control of your emotions. Right now you're so angry that I don't know what would happen.
A different note had crept into her voice. Sans shifted his bony weight on the stool.
It's not like I can help it.
Perhaps. You probably don't even notice it anymore. It's become a part of you, through whatever stuff has happened since the humans left the underground. And before you ask, my mother is ill again. We can't speak with her until she's better.
There it was. He'd wondered if she was going to pretend he'd never snapped at her.
Well, you can only ask me so many personal questions before I get touchy, lady. Frisk.
He tapped the work table a couple of times.
Look, I know you have a lot on your plate, and having to deal with me isn't much help. I just want to know, is there any way to tell the others I'm not dead or something? My brother's got to be out of his mind by now, and I don't want someone coming after me and getting caught.
Frisk shook her head, and his soul sank to the floor.
I'm sorry, Sans, but that's out of the question. Our king has forbidden any humans from coming within a day's walk of the entrance to the underground. And let's be very honest. What would happen if a human came up to you out of nowhere and said that they had an important message to give the monsters?
Sans' jaw clenched so hard that the priestess put her hand out, not quite touching his arm.
Sans, please, if there was any way to...
Forget it, okay? Just... never mind.
The skeleton glared at the windows facing out from the workroom. Like everything else in this damn place, they were too small for him to fit more than his head through. He'd gone through this in his own mind a dozen times. Even if he could break through the wood and stone, he could sense the barrier set behind the wall to block his shortcuts. The one along the outside wall was heavier than the ones in the bedroom, which were permeable, purely there to track his movements. It was debatable whether this one could be physically broken with something, but the moment he tried, she would know he was trying and stop him with a stronger barrier. What if he waited till she wasn't here and couldn't get back in time to stop him? If he broke through when she was distracted and far enough away, say, doing her church stuff in the middle of the night, then there wouldn't be much she could do. He could escape and decide later whether he wanted to come back or... Wait, come back? What the hell was he thinking? Why would he choose to be locked up by any human, no matter how pretty and gutsy and sweet and melodic and crap? Anyway, he wouldn't come back. He'd have to be sure to grab his notes and a few books for Alphys. Frisk could always get more copies. He already had plenty to report to King Asgore, though he felt a little uneasy about letting old Gory know that the most powerful barrier-making human was a determined sorceress whose soul could probably make you invincible. Actually, he felt a lot uneasy. Maybe he'd keep that to himself for now. Too bad he couldn't bring her with him.
Sans? Sans?
Frisk was touching his radius. She'd lifted her veil, large brown eyes turned up to his.
Are you all right?
Sans studied her for a long moment, reflecting that Papyrus had always wanted a pet. The idea was more appealing than he'd have liked to admit. He had to dismiss it with a shake of his head, and shake it again to get it loose.
I'm fine, kid. Remind me what this stuff was for?
After all, he thought darkly, pets were too much trouble, especially if you got attached to them. Besides, what would they feed her? A knock on the outer door startled them both. Before Frisk could respond, the door opened, and in strode a tall, thin man in dark robes, holding a box under his arm.
High Priestess. Honored guest.
The man said in a cool, whispery voice, giving them a short bow.
Dr. Seraph, this is a surprise. I wasn't expecting you so early.
The High Priestess responded, replacing the veil as she stood up.
Sans, this is Dr. Seraph, the Royal Sorcerer. Doctor, please meet Sans the Skeleton.
The man regarded Sans with mild curiosity.
I am very pleased to see you again, Sans the Skeleton. Has Her Eminence been treating you well?
Yeah. Do I know you from somewhere?
The Royal Sorcerer bowed again. He was unnervingly pale, the effect enhanced by dark eyes and long black hair framing his face.
I helped transport you from your cell to this room.
It took magic,
Frisk said, helpfully. He'd figured as much. Magic was the only way humans could do any damn thing. The boss monster looked at the box under the doctor's arm, which had a strange feel to it. He couldn't tell what it was, but he knew he didn't like it.
This is for you, as we discussed, Your Eminence. I will leave it in your office.
Frisk looked so uncomfortable that Sans glanced at the sorcerer, but nothing was visibly wrong. The man ignored them both, striding past the table and opening the door to her office. They heard rustling and the doors closing as he stepped back into the workroom.
That'll be all. Good day, my lady. Sans.
With another bow, the doctor turned and left.
Weirdo,
said the 10-foot skeleton. He found he didn't want to look away from the door, lest the guy come back and catch him unawares. He hadn't been very threatening, but something about him was very off.
He's unique.
Frisk sat down again.
Now, this infusion is almost ready. We'll leave it at room temperature for another 10 minutes or so before we stir it again. In the meantime, you can add 2 drops of peppermint oil, mint, orange, or lemon extract.
The rest of the day passed without major incident. Frisk had to stop in the middle of concocting a burn salve and leave Sans to finish it, though she cautioned him not to infuse it yet. She rather envied him. She had to walk to the other side of the castle to go over her parish's monthly accounts, balancing foot-long columns of tiny numbers to check that tithes and alms had come in and gone out properly. They never quite did, though it had gotten better in the past year, as she had made it increasingly clear that she was not interested in stealing from the poor or turning a blind eye to it, even for a few hundred extra dinar in her own column. The attempts at bribery were particularly insulting because she didn't need it. The realm's high priestess was entitled to 0.5% of the church's total monthly income, and through the magic of frugality and compound interest, her personal fortune had grown to the point where she didn't want to use any of it. Life was so strange. As a small child, she had only eaten once every couple of days, and now she could decide not to buy her own estate and maintain a huge staff for it. She was starting to wonder, though, about a rumor she'd heard regarding several hundred acres of land that would supposedly be up for sale in the next few months. They were principally wheat and barley fields, no more than 2 days' walk from the underground's main entrance. That was food for thought, indeed. Frisk eventually finished and stopped by the kitchens on her way back to her room. Sans was still wary of what he ate. She took care to have more than one damned fork now when she tasted his food for him. She wasn't worried for herself. If she didn't have time to eat in the kitchen, she routinely paid several of the staff a bit extra to make sure that everything they brought her had come straight from the pot or the pan, with no chance for someone to add any surprises. That had felt hypocritical at first, but she'd soon realized that she couldn't rely on people's consciences or sense of duty to keep her safe. Many, like the guard captain, were loyal for loyalty's sake, but many more of them needed external motivation, and she was helping the cooks and servers support their families. And she wasn't literally stealing from orphans to do it. An overstuffed basket sat outside her chambers, and the guard hastened to open the door and push it inside for her. Frisk carried the tray to the table, humming the barriers higher and setting the tray by Sans' elbow as he compared nearly identical recipes in 2 separate books. Then she dragged the laundry basket over, pulling a sail-like garment out end over end.
Here you are.
She said around an armful of fabric. The skeleton looked up, scowling at the interruption.
What?
This is for you.
Frisk tried to hold up an enormous shirt, then an enormous set of trousers.
I had them measure your clothes when we washed them for you. They made you another set.
Sans slowly got up and took the shirt from her, holding it against himself. It was sturdy linen, almost as thick as the canvas shirt he wore now, and much softer. The skeleton turned it this way and that, poking the material.
What's this for?
It's a shirt. It goes on the top half of your body. Humans need it for protection against the elements and modesty, but for you, it's principally so that you have a shirt on.
He acknowledged her smartassery with a respectful nod.
I mean, wasn't this a pain to make? I hope nobody expects me to pay for this. Not my fault if what I got on ain't pretty enough for you.
Oh, it was. Getting something that size made up so quickly cost me more than I paid for all the clothes I've had this year combined. But you're not a slave. You're my apprentice. That means you're working for me, and I'm keeping track of your wages. It'll take a while to pay this off, but I think you'll manage it before you leave.
Frisk stuck her arm through one of the trouser legs, flapping it to shake it out. Sans had another odd expression.
You're paying me for the stuff I make? I thought apprentices were the one paying to learn.
I consider the knowledge you'll bring back to the underground to be your apprenticeship fee. And as this arrangement wasn't your idea in the first place, we're bending the rules. I see you've made 3 sets of burn salve, 2 of which look usable, and you're almost done with the cough elixir. Fair market value for those is about 10 dinar total, so minus the infusion I'll do for you, you've earned about 7 already.
He scratched the side of his head.
What am I paying you for my food?
Frisk laughed, shaking out the other leg.
The pleasure of your company.
At his blank stare, she shook her head and uncovered the tray.
No one charges their apprentice for room and board, Sans.
The priestess put down the trousers, picked up the fork, and leaned in for a bite of baked fish. The skeleton pulled the tray away, making her stab the table instead.
If I owe you money, you're definitely not gonna poison me.
He pointed out, and began shoveling it in.
You're right.
Frisk said gravely, trying and failing to hide her grin.
I'm glad you've had time to mull it over.
Sans pounded the table with his free fist, rattling the glass vials.
Might as well, just for the hell of it, right?
She covered her mouth with the back of her hand.
That was weak. Think of a better one and let me know.
You're right.
He said, and waited for her to take a bite before he added,
We really need to scale back.
They had to stop laughing long enough to eat. By the time dinner was over and Frisk had carried the dishes out, both were relaxed enough to be sleepy.
I don't know why I keep wanting to go to bed. All I've done is read and catnap.
Mumbled Sans, trudging into the bedroom and flopping onto the mattress.
Not even using my damn magic.
You're eating human food, so your body is getting more nutrition and working harder to process it.
Frisk pointed out, settling into her chair.
Mother said the humans all had to eat more to stop being hungry underground.
She tried not to burp out loud.
Besides, you're probably still recovering from the energy you spent being captured and then trying to kill me. Thrice.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
The skeleton stretched all the phalanges of his toes, flexing them in turn.
Probably won't do it again.
He added truthfully.
Thank you.
Frisk also stretched her legs out, Sans noticing how absurdly tiny her feet were as she got up from her chair with the recipe book. She reached down to dog-ear the page they were on.
Well,
He whisked the book out of her hand and flipped it open to smooth the page out.
Use a bookmark, woman! What are you, some kind of barbarian?
It's an old book. They're all creased anyway.
She argued, trying to take it back. He held it over his head, roughly a mile out of reach.
All right, then, fine.
She said with a smirk.
I'm going to take a bath. Read through and find 5 more ingredients to discuss when I get back.
She shut the door on quiet skeletal griping, smiling to herself. The next day passed in a similar fashion. at least outwardly. Frisk took careful note of everything Sans made, ignoring his suggestion to dock him the price of the ingredients when he screwed up. Luckily, he was catching on fast, even if she wouldn't let him infuse anything yet. She also wouldn't tell him how much his new clothing had cost, saying only that she'd let him know when he broke even. What really got his attention was her adding,
If you make enough money, we'll send a few bushels of wheat back with you. No one can be upset that you were gone for so long if you come bearing gifts, can they?
Sans was glad he didn't have facial muscles or anything similar to betray his inner turmoil. He'd had a lot of second thoughts last night about bashing his way out of here, due in small part to the new outfit and the possibility of bringing food to the underground, but mostly because she was working her brain magic on him again, being attractive and kind and easy to talk to, like the terrible sadistic person she was. Not. She was not remotely terrible or sadistic, and that was the problem. He still didn't understand it, or how it was getting worse so much quicker than he'd anticipated. He just wanted to get away before she entangled him any further. Then he'd started thinking of Snowdon right before he fell asleep, and for the first time since he'd been captured, he had dreamed of home. He dreamed their house was cold and dark, with no one upstairs, and a single light on in the kitchen. A female form was silhouetted in the kitchen doorway, hands on hips, facing something slumped over the side of the couch.
Come on, Pap. He's probably just out on another hunting trip,
she argued.
Is that supposed to make me feel better?
The thin nasal voice hurt Sans' soul, and not just because he desperately wanted to hear it again. This wasn't his boisterous, indomitable, recklessly cheerful brother. This was a small, heartsick papyrus, one Sans hadn't seen or heard in a long, long time. The last time it happened, at least Sans had been there for him. Now Sans was gone too.
Hunting animals, Papyrus. He's hunting animals, not humans.
The woman thumped the wall for emphasis, knocking little bits of plaster from the ceiling. Damn it, Sans had told her to quit doing that.
That's gotta be it. We don't eat humans, and he knows how bad the food situation is, right? So...
I don't care what he's doing. Well, not much.
The skeleton heaved a sigh, raising his face from the couch cushion.
Undine, I can't reach him. If he's all right, where is he?
And then something had seeped out of the darkness and gently enclosed Sans' mind, blotting out the dream like a sponge on spilled water. He had woken up knowing that it wasn't a dream and was instantly enraged. He'd been so grateful that the nightmares had stopped, and too damn stupid to figure out that she'd set a barrier up against external influences, including dreams shared with Pap. He'd ponder the full ramifications of it blocking nightmares another day. The memory of his brother's expression had decided him. Agreement or no agreement, he was getting out of here tonight. Of course, he couldn't pack up the stuff he needed before their lesson was done, or right afterward. He wasn't worried about giving himself away. As an accomplished bullshitter, he knew he was behaving perfectly normally. The moment dinner was cleared away, he called dibs on the bathroom, which had a nice, huge tub that he wanted to use one more time. When he was done and she'd gone in and locked the door, and after the usual stab of curiosity as to what she looked like outside of clothes, Sans quietly put everything he wanted into a satchel he'd found under the work table and stowed it behind the door in the bedroom, where he had to wait until she was done getting dressed. The one odd thing was that after she emerged from her dressing room in her full priestessy regalia, she went into her office and spent a few minutes doing nothing that he could hear, after which she was wearing a different brooch. She'd had a white one on the first day they met, but this one shone with a grayish light under her veil.
Going so soon?
He asked carelessly. It was 10 o'clock. She smiled.
If my duties only included saying words and a few songs, I would sleep much easier. There's always someone to speak to before and after services.
Gotcha. Well, have fun. I'm gonna read something with a damn bookmark before I go to bed. Oh, I forgot to ask. Mind if I try to make a few things while you're not here?
Go right ahead. You'll pay for it if you burn down my workroom, so I'm trusting you to behave.
Was he imagining a weird little inflection there? No, she looked totally wonderful. Or normal. She looked totally normal.
Good night, Sans.
She said, adjusting her veil.
Good night, Frisk.
He stretched out on the bed as she shut the door. That was it then. He might not ever see her again. It wasn't a good feeling. In fact, it felt pretty bad. Time to quit feeling it, think of Pap, and focus on his plan of action. The plan. Well, for starters, it would be dumb to try breaking out immediately. He wished he knew exactly where the chapel was. He'd heard occasional church types singing off in the distance, but that didn't give him an idea of how far away she'd be during the service, or for exactly how long. Instead, he watched the clock and fidgeted, as nervous as the first time he'd faced down a group of human sorcerers. Maybe this was a dumb idea. Maybe he should just ask her to take down the barrier, keeping him from dreaming with Papyrus, just for one night. She was too kind to refuse, and intelligent enough to ask him for more information in exchange. Frisk knew he used to be a normal monster, and might think to ask if he'd always been able to speak across dreams. It wouldn't be too far a stretch for her to keep questioning how he became a boss monster. She'd also realized that if she let him communicate with other monsters, he could tell them several things that she would prefer they not know, including her identity and full capabilities. It was one thing for her to take a calculated risk and let him go back to the underground with that information, or, much more likely, to make him forget it before he left. Some humans had the ability to excise bits of memory like that. It'd be another thing entirely to permit a conversation that no one else could even hear. She was nice, not stupid. So Sans waited until 11:45, and then he sat in the workroom with the satchel looped around his wrist for another 10 minutes, nerves humming. Then he got up, went to the double doors leading out of her rooms, and silently picked up a 7-foot decorative statue standing at the room's threshold, wedging it inward across the doorframe. He went back to the workroom, judged the weakest place in the outside wall, reared back, and slammed his fist directly between two of the windows. Frisk had started to relax as the organist began playing, and incense floated in the chapel air. She was opening her mouth for the first hymn when a warning note sounded in the back of her mind. The barrier to her workroom's outside windows was tingling, and then it suddenly burned away, the warning note sliding all the way up to a full-blown klaxon. She gritted her teeth so hard that it hurt, controlling her expression with a supreme effort as the voice in her head screamed,
Sans, you two-faced sack of fertilizer.
The only good thing about this situation was that she wasn't leading this service. Therefore, it was odd, but not completely conspicuous, when she stepped to the back of the choir, touched her new brooch, and vanished. Sans was getting soft from proximity to someone as aggressively good-hearted as the High Priestess, because he found he didn't want to demolish the entire wall. For one thing, without his magic, it'd be too much effort. More importantly, though, Frisk's rooms were many, many stories above the ground, and falling masonry could kill or injure someone below who hadn't earned it. Most important of all, Frisk would probably end up trying to help dig them out and put herself in danger. He also figured that he had time to do things neatly and cost her less in repairs. Everything had been loosened by that first colossal blow, but he had to give it a few more whacks before he could start pulling it apart, making a pile of glass shards, wood paneling, bricks, and stones in front of her office. Luckily, whoever had constructed the outside wall hadn't done a great job, or else it would have taken him all night. A carefully judged body slam was enough to weaken the remaining support structures. A few kicks and a yank created a space big enough for the giant skeleton to squeeze through, and then he could see the barrier itself. Panting, Sans took a moment to survey his handiwork. It sucked to exert himself like that, but he figured that sometimes in life, you just had to punch things until they broke. Unfortunately, he didn't have that option with the barrier. The old stories came back to him as he stared at the golden latticework hovering outside the ruined wall. How was he going to get through without touching it directly or throwing something big enough to hurt someone below? His eyes fell on the work table and the vials of stuff he'd made this afternoon. 4 hadn't been infused yet. Sans grabbed one, pulled off the cork, and with a speck of magic, willed the liquid to boil, burn, dissolve anything it touched. It promptly began to fizzle and hiss in his hand, and he had to fling it away like an idiot before it started eating through his metacarpals. He did one thing right in throwing it at the barrier, which instantly melted and let the chilly night air wash over him. Outside, moonlight shadowed the bricks of a nearby wall that stretched almost all the way to the ground, ending in the roof of a building only a couple stories high. He could hop out, grab onto the brick edifice, climb down safely, and be gone before Frisk even got back up here, never mind moving the statue and getting the doors open. From there, it'd only be a matter of time before his magic regenerated and he could take a shortcut home. Poor Frisk. She'd tried. Hell, she'd survived his murder attempts and taught him a few things. And he'd never forget her. Maybe he'd get a music box or something in her honor. Anyway, she was better off losing track of him and finding a smaller, tamer monster to work with. What was she even getting from him being here, besides a hell of a lot of trouble? The question was supposed to be rhetorical, but, as if in reply, he thought of Frisk standing at the work table with her arm up those ridiculously oversized trousers, grinning and saying,
The pleasure of your company.
Looking up at him like he was her friend. Not an inferior, or a dangerous monster, or a giant pain in the ass, pun absolutely intended. Of course, it wasn't as if she had many other friends, but he couldn't tell himself that she was just using a captive freak to keep her company. He already knew her too well for that. This, right here, this was why he needed to leave, now. The skeleton took a few steps back, gauging the distance to... went something in his mental ear. He jerked around to see Frisk, standing half in his shadow, half in the moonlight, with her veil in her hand and absolute murder in her eye.
Sans?
It was a whisper, lost in the wind.
Shit, fuck, shit, fuckity fuck, shit.
Rang in his head as the satchel hit the floor.
Frisk?
He whispered. Frisk beckoned him closer with one finger. Unbelieving, he knelt, and she punched him so hard that he almost felt it.
Here is what's going to happen,
she said as he touched his jaw.
I assume you've blocked the doors, so you will go and unblock them. And I'll tell the guard that you were, we'll say you were fighting off an assassin, and everyone will be impressed when they see how much damage you did trying to kill him before he escaped, won't they?
Sans nodded helplessly.
How'd you...
How did I get here?
She tossed the veil aside, letting it drift to the floor.
Let me tell you a story, Sans. Once upon a time, yesterday morning, I had a long talk with Dr. Seraph. He said you probably didn't intend to stay for a whole month, and I needed to be on my guard, just in case you decided to pull a stunt like this. I didn't want to believe him, but I followed his advice, and lo and behold, less than a week later, I caught my lying, backstabbing apprentice trying to break his word because he was apparently too bored with me to waste time learning crucial information for the survival of his entire race. The end!
Frisk had to pause for breath. The boss monster took great exception to that last accusation, and he doubted that was actually the end of the story, but he was afraid to interrupt.
Do you see this?
She continued. Sans flinched as the tiny woman ripped off her brooch and brandished it at him.
Dr. Seraph brought it yesterday afternoon. It seems he'd taken some of your magic while you were unconscious.
And not only did he refuse to return it to you, he said I couldn't be here every hour of the day, and I needed to have this if you ever tried to break loose. He infused it with enough of your power to teleport myself one time. Do you have any idea how angry I am that he was right, and I was right to listen? And do you know how sick to my stomach I feel right now?
Frisk threw the brooch to the floor, where it shattered. The last bit of magic quietly evaporated, and she pressed the back of her hand to her lips, eyes unfocusing.
And how do you stand?
There it was. He couldn't believe it had taken this long to catch up with her. The first time he'd tried using a shortcut, it left him feeling like his head had been screwed on backwards. The skeleton glanced at the open, crumbling wall, then at Frisk, who was leaning heavily on the work table, eyes closed. Then the priestess squeaked as Sans swept her up into the crook of his arm and headed to the bathroom.
Put me down,
she croaked, thumping his clavicle.
Yes, m'lady,
he said, opening the door, poking the light on, and placing her at the very back of the room.
Go for it.
Once she was settled and could puke in relative peace, Sans went to the double doors leading into the hall, replaced the statue in its niche, and headed back to the workroom. Her office door was blocked by the many chunks of wall piled in front of it, and moving them again would take effort, so the skeleton ignored it for now. He picked up the satchel and set it on the work table, wondering if the wind was too cold for her, and how, exactly, he was going to pay for this in every sense of the word. After one more look outside, Sans made himself tiptoe back to the bathroom and ask,
You done?
There was a pause, the sound of water running, and a much longer pause before she opened the door and stared up at him.
What are you still doing here?
She demanded. Sans blinked at her, mostly for effect.
Is that a trick question? I'm making sure you're okay. That magic can knock you on your ass the first couple of times you try it.
Her face tightened, a hard, bitter expression that probably shouldn't have surprised him.
You don't say.
She turned her head to cough, resting her forehead on the tile wall.
Congratulations to you, Sans. I'm here, but I'm in no condition to do anything. Your plan worked after all.
She pushed herself upright.
Good night.
Shit.
First.
The priestess walked right by to open the double doors, humming like a swarm of bees. He heard her exclaim something about the guard not being there, and mutter that she'd deal with it in the morning. She barred the doors shut, which he hadn't even noticed was an option, and wobbled past him into her dressing room, evading his half-hearted attempt to steady her. Hangers rattled. There was an occasional sniffle. When Frisk came out in a long, crushed velvet robe, she actually looked offended to see him.
Don't you have somewhere to be? I said good night, Sans.
Wasn't she going to at least try to stop him? Sure, she was sick and exhausted, but where was her determination? Was she so upset that she was determined to cut her losses and let him go? That really seemed to be it. Well, Sans should have been elated, but mostly he just felt insulted. Besides, he couldn't leave until they got a few things straight, or else he'd spend the rest of his life trying not to think about it. The boss monster racked his brain for a witty yet conciliatory opener, but what came out was,
You're not boring?
A blast of wind howled through the room, flipping the lighter books open and ruffling the weighed-down stacks of paper. Frisk remained stock still as her short, wavy hair fluttered across her face.
I beg your pardon?
She said, colder than the autumn air.
Okay, yeah, I admit it. I was gonna ditch you.
He said desperately.
But it wasn't 'cause I don't like you or I don't care about helping the other monsters. Okay, you remember all you heard about Papyrus, right?
Her expression softened a little as she nodded.
I had a dream about him last night that I'm pretty sure was real. Me being gone and him not knowing I'm okay is killing him, Frisk. I can't.
She stayed silent as Sans pressed the heel of his hand to his forehead. It had been so long since he'd told someone the entire truth that he felt completely exposed. It was scary as hell, but he owed it to her and to Pap.
You gotta understand, my brother's all I got left, and I'm all he's got. You've been nothing but fair to me, and it's not your fault there's no real way to contact him. I can't go a whole month without letting him know I'll be home soon. I can't dream at him with your barrier up.
He sat down with his legs crossed, staring at the floor.
I spend too much damn time away as it is. He never knows for sure if I'm coming back.
Frisk swallowed.
Why didn't you tell me sooner how important this was to you? And what do you mean, dream at him?
I didn't bother because you might have thought I was lying to make you feel sorry for me. I know I wouldn't trust me.
The skeleton jerked his head at the ruined wall.
What I mean is, I can talk to Pap while we're both dreaming, but you wouldn't be there to hear what we were saying. I could tell him all sorts of crap, like how strong the High Priestess is and how much safer it'd be for us monsters if she was dead.
The priestess was silent again. Sans risked a glance in time to see her reach up to sweep her hair behind her ear, only to yelp in pain. Sure enough, as she raised her hand to inspect it, the outside knuckle was red and swollen.
How did I not notice this?
Frisk tried to move it and had to stifle another exclamation.
Oh, wonderful. If it hurts this much, I must have broken it.
She made an incoherent noise and started toward the rack of finished potions on the work table. Sans dimly recalled that humans didn't feel as much pain when they were scared or excited, and that it could catch up to them pretty fast. It also occurred to him that it was a bad idea for a small human to hit a thick-headed skeleton with her bare hand.
What are you doing? You can heal that up in a jiffy.
I can't heal myself. I'm not very adept at healing to begin with, and I can't make it work on me at all.
That couldn't be right.
You mean to tell me you're good enough to hold me off and keep me penned in for days with no magic, but...
Leave me alone.
Her voice was so quiet and furious that he stopped dead. But as she picked a vial and started to pull the cork out with her teeth, Sans got up and held his own hand out.
Let me see.
With as much dignity as she could muster, Frisk closed her mouth and handed him the vial. He put it back impatiently and beckoned again.
Not that, dummy, your hand!
The priestess gave him a long, eloquent look. When he didn't move, she placed her broken hand in his huge one, wincing as his thumb closed lightly over her wrist. It was hard to remember how to turn his magic green, but she'd been right about intentions. It helped to think about how badly he wanted it to work. Not only to help her, but to prove that he was capable of fixing things, as well as destroying them. Sure enough, within seconds, his palm began to glow as if he held a handful of emeralds. When Sans could bring himself to let her go, she flexed it easily.
You've gotten some magic back already,
she observed. Frisk smiled at him for a moment, and he couldn't not smile back.
You know,
she said, anger rapidly resurfacing.
You're not only a lying reprobate, you are a huge idiot.
She rapped her knuckles on his palm.
I've always had a barrier guarding the bedroom from any external magic. If that was the only thing keeping you from reaching Papyrus, you should have asked me to remove it.
Sans sat down again.
But...
As for the possibility of giving him illicit information, I will ask you this only once.
Frisk moved closer, looking him square in the sockets.
Do you intend to tell the other monsters at any point that your race would be better off with me dead?
He didn't even have to think about it before he answered.
Not anymore. You're pretty damn useful as you are, speaking up on our behalf to the other humans. I don't see anyone pressuring you to screwing us over.
A brief smile.
I'm glad to hear it. For my part, I don't mind letting you talk to your brother, as long as you take me with you. I'd love to say hello. I've heard so much about him that it'll be like meeting an old friend. If you start tattling on me in some fashion, I can always pull the barrier back up.
You want me to bring you in my dream?
Blink, blink.
But how? What are you gonna...
One thing at a time, Sans. First, we're going to bed.
We're what now?
If you're not leaving yet, then we're going to bed. Now. This mess can wait till morning.
With a nod at her blocked office door, Frisk motioned for him to follow her into the bedroom.
Come along. There's nowhere else for me to sleep, and I'm freezing.
And so it was that Sans found himself lying rigid on the huge feather mattress, the priestess curled up like a cat in the armchair. He had no idea why he was so nervous. He couldn't even muster a semi-joke about her joining him in bed.
I've heard of this spell before,
said Frisk, who seemed unperturbed by their proximity.
It's not very complicated. You've just healed me, and I've recently used some of your magic, so we have enough of a connection that I should be able to find you once we're asleep. The key word being sleep, Sans. You have to relax. I'm not going to eat you, no matter how short-sighted and dishonorable you've been.
You're not gonna let that go, are you?
He mumbled.
You have no idea. We haven't even talked about repairing the wall yet. For now, though, don't worry about it. We need to find Papyrus and set you both at ease.
Now Sans felt nervous and extremely weird again. He turned onto his side so she couldn't see him changing color.
Okay, yeah. Thanks.
Of course,
she said, as though it was the most natural thing in the world to do a favor for someone who had completely betrayed her trust, and turned off the witchlight. He felt her raise another barrier at the bedroom door, one solid enough to stop an army, and a thinner barrier disappeared from behind the headboard.
There,
she said in the darkness.
We'll see how well this works. Go to sleep, Sans.
That seemed unlikely, but he'd forgotten who he was dealing with. When about 10 minutes had passed and the orange light of his eyes was still going strong, something wonderful started creeping up on him. A soothing vibration that spread through every bone in his body before he even knew what he was hearing. It was Frisk humming, of course, and of course it worked. Sans was more than content to let the sound and her presence lull him to sleep. He jerked upright as something hit his skull, reflexively swatting the air and yelling,
Piss off!
The lights were back on. In fact, it was full daylight, or what passed for it. Sans rubbed his eye sockets, turning this way and that. He was still in bed, but the bed stood alone in the middle of an open, snowy field. Kid monsters were racing back and forth under gaily decorated trees, throwing snowballs at each other and catching him in the crossfire. The skeleton brushed himself off, reasoning that the underground could be a weird place, but it wasn't quite random snowbed weird. This must be a dream, then. Damn it. Oh well. At least it was a nice one, and it felt pretty real. His good dreams tended to be fuzzy, while every single one of his nightmares was incredibly vivid. Footsteps crunched on the snow behind him.
Well, hello there. That was simple,
said Frisk, looking around them as he got up. She was in her plush robe and bare feet, but seemed at ease.
So, this is Snowdin. Which house is yours?
Brother?
Sans froze as a familiar shape emerged from a nearby fog of ice crystals.
Papyrus?
I knew it!
Papyrus had run to give his brother a bear hug, and fell straight through him, as if Sans was also made of fog.
What is this, Sans? Have you become too lazy to stay solid?
He accused him from the ground.
It's a dream, bro. This happens every damn time. Just keep it together and listen, okay? I'm here to let you know...
Wait, a human? Is that Chris?
Papyrus was staring up at Frisk, his face somehow creased in puzzlement.
Is that really you? I thought you'd be... Chrisser. Yeah.
Not every human is Chris, Pap. Don't be racist.
Hello.
Frisk said, offering a bright smile and a hand up.
My name is Frisk. It's wonderful to meet you, Papyrus.
Yes, it is. You are clearly very wise and attractive, human.
Papyrus brushed the snow from his fake armor, throwing his red scarf back over his shoulder in so dramatic a fashion that he didn't notice Frisk grinning, though Sans sure did.
What are you doing in my great and attractive dream?
He added. Still smiling, Frisk watched the pack of young monsters run by. The kids didn't seem to notice them, though the bed was still there and her purple robe stood out like a dark beacon against the snow.
Your brother wanted to see you, and I decided to come along. Sans was captured by humans about a week ago when he was out looking for food, but please don't worry about—
Captured?
Papyrus clapped both hands to his skull.
This is terrible! Please, decapture him immediately, human, or else I...
Pap, take it easy. She's okay. In fact, she's the reason I ain't dead or enslaved right now.
Sans plucked at his shirt.
See, she even got me some new duds. You can finally stop bitching about what I'm wearing.
Papyrus stopped flailing long enough to examine Sans' shirt.
Yeah, I see no holes or questionable stains. What sorcery is this?
Sans smirked, letting his brother poke at him in vain.
I told you, bro. I just got it. You don't have to rip me apart like this.
Frisk rocked back and forth on her heels.
So,
She said, over Papyrus's exasperated groaning.
I gather you knew a boy named Chris from the last human delegation. Is that right?
Yes, it is right. Chris was our dear friend.
Papyrus said, as Sans grimaced and turned away.
We went for walks, we had sleepovers, we made hand puppets that also had sleepovers. It was like having a cute little pet that cleaned up after itself. We've all missed him very much. Yeah.
Yeah, he left with the other humans. Can we please move on now?
Yes, of course. I'm going to borrow your brother for a few more weeks.
Frisk told Papyrus. The latter was glaring at his brother's new shirt again, as if daring it to make a false move.
I have a plan to start making peace between monsters and humans. But I need a monster's help to do it. Can you get along without Sans until I send him back to the underground?
Papyrus straightened, one hand on his chin.
You won't hurt him?
Absolutely not, Papyrus. He'll be back safe and sound.
Papyrus nodded, evidently impressed by her sincerity.
I am impressed by your sincerity, human. If this dream is not my magnificent imagination playing tricks on me again, then I, the great Papyrus, shall spare my good-for-nothing brother for a little while longer.
Without warning, the skeleton grabbed at Sans' wrist bones.
Human, I would like to talk to my brother in secret for a moment, if you will please excuse us. It will be secret.
Of course. I'll be right here. Just make sure it's not too secret, please.
Sans covered his face with his hand as Papyrus marched toward the fog bank, still holding his brother's imaginary wrist.
You can't touch me, remember?
Sans called after him.
I knew that. Congratulations, brother. You've passed his test.
Papyrus waited for Sans to join him, and they walked towards the river.
Are you sure that's not Chris?
Sans laughed, jerking his thumb in Frisk's direction.
Does that human look like a 16-ish-year-old boy?
No, it looks like a human, but it seems delightful. The great Papyrus thinks you should bring it back here with you. It's been too long since we had a human to pillow fight with.
That's probably not a great idea.
Why not?
I could spend literally the rest of the night telling you all the reasons why not, but the biggest one is that she's the High Priestess, Pap. The other humans would definitely notice if she was gone.
High Priestess?
Papyrus cocked his head in perplexity.
Why would a delightful human be a High Priestess? Don't they create barriers?
It's complicated, bro. Look, I've gotta go soon. Is there anything else you want to say?
His younger brother paused and sighed, shoulders slumping.
Sans, were you really just looking for food? When you got caught, I mean.
The bigger skeleton tried to kick a chunk of ice into the water, his foot passing right through it.
I wasn't slaughtering humans, if that's what you're asking. I was mostly trying to track down monsters who have been sold off recently. But I did want to see how the humans' harvests are turning out. And it looks like it was pretty good this year.
Papyrus nodded, still troubled.
All right, brother, I understand. Please, just take care of yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, you too, Pap.
Sans felt a familiar stab of trepidation and backed away.
Shit, I've got a nightmare coming. I'll see you soon, okay? Don't tell anyone about Frisk.
He had to turn and run before Papyrus could answer. Frisk was sitting on the bed in the snowfield, ducking snowballs. She turned and started to say,
I hope you weren't telling on me.
No more dream. End it now.
He panted. The priestess didn't waste time asking stupid questions. As the nightmare nipped at Sans' heel, Frisk made a quick swiping gesture. And just like that, he was back in bed, in the bedroom, staring at the sun-washed ceiling. The skeleton sighed in relief. He rested his forearm across his eyes. Between the radius and ulna, he could see the flickering shadows of birds flying past the open windows.
Thanks, kiddo, and thanks for letting me talk to him. I really appreciate it.
Sans scratched the top of his skull, rolling over to face Frisk.
So, how'd you like Papyrus? He's a cool guy, huh?
Frisk didn't answer because she wasn't there. A strange human child sat in the armchair, perched on the edge of the seat, holding a kitchen knife. It stared at him with red, shining eyes, teeth bared in a horrible grin. If Sans had had more than a shred of magic left, he would have pulled all his blasters at once and obliterated half the building. As it was, he jerked back, nearly choking in terror. The child wasn't moving, but menace radiated off it like heat from a furnace, eyes boring into him as its grin widened. Sans looked around wildly for an escape. The windows were too small, but maybe he could... A sharp whistle split the air. The barrier snapped on, and the child vanished. Sans was sitting upright in bed again, in the dark, awake, panting as though he'd run a mile in a few seconds.
Sans, I'm so sorry.
The light snapped on. Frisk stood at his bedside, wide-eyed, clutching the neck of her robe.
I didn't think I would have that nightmare again before we woke up. I thought it'd be fine.
She took a step onto the bed, leaning over to grab his humerus.
Sans? Sans! Please say something!
He shook her off, and she stumbled backwards, falling into the armchair.
What the fuck was that?
Frisk sat up and pulled her robe tighter around her shoulders.
I'm sorry. I should have warned you. It's the reason I have that barrier up in the first place.
She swallowed hard.
It shouldn't happen again.
It had better not.
Sans snarled.
What the hell was that thing anyway?
I don't know.
She looked so miserable that Sans wanted to smack himself, but he was too unnerved to lie and tell her that it was okay. He was shaking so hard that he could almost hear his bones rattle. For a solid minute, the only other sound in the room was the wind blowing outside the shuttered windows.
I hope you had a good talk with Papyrus.
Frisk said presently, with a decent attempt at calmness, placing her palm on the bedroom door to dissolve the thick barrier.
I can see why everyone likes him so much. It's good to know he hasn't changed.
The skeleton grunted, hoping she was smart enough not to ask him any questions about him changing.
Yeah, thanks for fixing that up for us. Sorry I pushed you just now.
It's fine. It was an accident.
Frisk fiddled with the key in its lock.
You know, Sans, I'd like you to help repair the damage you caused, but if you still want to leave, I won't stop you. I wasn't thinking of how much it was to ask, staying an entire month.
Sans stared at her. She wouldn't turn around. Finally, he said,
The crap, lady? You already let me talk to Pap. That was the whole reason I tried to bust out of here. Why wouldn't I stick around and make it up to you? You really think I'm that bad?
There came a soft knock at the door, startling them both.
Your Eminence?
It was a male voice, deep and pleasant.
Are you awake, my lady? Please forgive my intrusion, but His Holiness urgently requests your presence.
Daylight was showing through the closed shutters.
Yes, of course. I'll be there in a moment,
said Frisk, running her fingers through her hair, eye twitching as she found a tangle. Sans watched her and watched her move to unlock the door, feeling a different sort of unease.
Wait a sec. Wait, didn't you bar the big doors last night? How'd he get...
The man knocked again.
Just a moment.
Frisk repeated, turning the key. She glanced behind her.
What, Sans?
The door banged open. Before she could blink, a stranger in tattered clothes rushed in, his arm raised to strike. The boss monster was already moving. The man lunged, and there was a sound of steel hitting bone. The priestess found herself staring at the tip of a knife, inches from her face, jutting from between massive skeletal fingers.
Sans!
Cried Frisk, twisting around to look at him. Red clouded Sans' vision, but one clear spot remained. With his free hand, he reached out, corralled Frisk, and gently maneuvered her behind him, fingers forming a protective cage. The other hand flexed briefly, then backhanded the intruder so hard that the man rolled clear out of the bedroom, hitting the work table with a crack and a thump. The skeleton clamped his teeth on the dagger's hilt and pried the blade out from between his knuckles, jerking his head to fling it to the other side of the bedroom. There was technically nothing to pierce where the knife had been lodged, but it still stung. He glanced down to be sure Frisk was unscathed, then edged forward into the workroom. To his great irritation, the man wasn't dead. He was not only conscious, but pulling himself up on the table.
The fuck are you?
Demanded Sans. Only the vague awareness that Frisk was watching kept him from grabbing the guy and pinching his head off. The stranger wiped the corner of his mouth on his sleeve, squinting against Sans' literal glare. He was gaunt and generally gross-looking, but had moved fast enough and aimed the knife with enough skill to peg him as a professional killer.
What's a big-ass talking skeleton doing here? They said you got sold off already. So it was you bashing that wall down. What the hell do you even do that for? It took me all goddamn night to get out.
Sans glanced at the office door, which was ajar. Several pieces of broken masonry had been moved out of the way by shoving the door repeatedly from the inside. The guy must have snuck into the office after Frisk left, while Sans was in the bedroom, but before he blocked the entrance, and gotten trapped in his hiding place by all the debris piled against it. It would have been kind of funny, except that if Sans really had left, Frisk would be dead now. The young woman was leaning on Sans' femur, peering around his outspread fingers. He could feel her trembling, which only intensified his urge to kill something.
I know you. You spoke to me after the service last week. You said I
Had a positively angelic voice.
The man leered at her, showing several broken teeth.
It's truth, but I needed to be sure exactly who you were. The last High Priestess used body doubles sometimes.
He looked her up and down.
Gotta say, I like yours a lot better.
She shuddered. Sans leaned down, not taking his now flaming eyes from the assassin.
You need this piece of crap alive, Frisk, or can I take him apart now?
Frisk!
The man cackled, slapping the work table with a dirty palm.
That's your real name, lady. That's gotta be the dumbest...
And just like that, he launched himself at Frisk, closing the distance and ducking between Sans' legs like a snake. He whipped another knife out from his belt and would have sliced her neck open if Sans hadn't been ready to nudge her out of the way, grabbing the assassin on the backswing and slamming him against the open door. Before Frisk could react, Sans turned his head to the opposite wall and said,
Holy crap, what's that?
As she whirled around, Sans plucked the knife out of the man's hand and gave him one squeeze, very quick and very hard.
Whoops. My bad. Nothing there.
He said to cover the sound of ribs breaking. The priestess started to turn back.
Stay where you are.
Sans ordered, pulling the assassin out of her line of sight, stepping into the workroom and closing the door behind him.
Oh, no you don't.
He said loudly, as if chasing the man down.
No, stop! We just want to talk to... Oh no!
The assassin didn't seem to appreciate the theatrics, especially since Sans was carrying him straight to the broken wall. Ignoring the man's feeble protests, the skeleton drew his arm back and murmured,
Now think about what you've done, pal.
Before tossing him out into the open air. His only concern was that the bastard would make a lot of noise on the way down, but it seemed he'd knocked the wind out of him. Ha! By the time Frisk peeked out of the bedroom, the assassin was long gone. Sans shook his head and turned from the opening.
Nope. Sorry, I couldn't catch him before he told us who sent him.
He wished he had his jacket. His hands had nowhere to go.
You alright, Frisk?
The priestess gulped and wiped her eyes on her sleeve.
No, I'm not.
She slid down, back to the wall, and wrapped her arms around her knees. She didn't seem to be physically hurt, so for the moment, he said,
Okay.
And stared at the slightly open office door.
Son of a bitch, I'm gonna tear the card a newborn. Do you think he knew you were sleeping in there, or was it just a convenient place to crap?
Frisk's shoulders had hunched and her face gone pale. Sans ground his teeth, cursing his stupidity.
Well, it's over. He won't bother you again.
He reassured her, coming to kneel beside her.
At least that cover story about the assassin ain't a lie now, right?
She didn't look reassured at all. With the threat of bodily harm removed, Sans was out of his element again, with no clue how to help her. He wasn't much good at saying nice things, and he didn't have sound-based magic to hum at her. Should he explain that this was an inconvenient but probably solvable problem that she'd always known might come up? No, that would be dumb. She already had enough problems. She didn't need to worry about more shitheads getting in here to hurt her. As long as she was an important and politically vocal person, it wasn't like she could do much to... Wait, that was it. Sans had the idea.
Actually, you know what?
He waited for her to shake her head.
You were saying this weird stuff about me leaving once I'd seen Pap. Before we talk about that, I gotta ask, what's the going rate for a bodyguard around here? Good one, not just some moron following you around trying to look scary.
She bit her lip, a habit Sans had noticed and been distracted by several times already.
It depends. A skilled full-time personal guard? Anywhere from 50 to 100 dinar
Oh, nice. I can probably...
an hour. I only sleep a few hours a night, so...
Frisk gave him the ghost of a smile.
If you're offering your services, Sans, I'd be glad to accept. Would a salary of 1,000 per diem be acceptable?
Now he really was at a loss for words.
1,000 a freaking day?
He repeated blankly. Frisk nodded. Her shock seemed to be fading as she thought aloud.
You could pay for your clothes in one day, and I can negotiate the repairs down to about 10 days worth. After that, well, wheat is about 5 dinar a bushel.
Despite herself, she sniffled again.
You could buy a lot of wheat, or beans, or wedding cakes, or literally anything else you want to take underground with you.
He was patting himself on the back when, without warning, Frisk's smile faded.
I'm sorry, I didn't listen to you before I unlocked the door. Thank you for staying with me. And thank you for saving my life.
Shit.
Was as far as Sans got before he lost even that bit of coherence. His senses were already heightened by the unexpected danger. His soul still feeling a little queasy at how close she'd come to dying right in front of him. To cap it off with Frisk looking up at him like this with big eyes, messy hair, and her robe falling off her shoulder was more than he could handle. She never looked bad, but right now, damn. Sans didn't realize he was reaching for her until his fingertip brushed her cheek, toying with a wavy lock of her hair.
Don't mention it. It's the least I can do.
Frisk pulled away, face flushing, but only in momentary surprise. He devoutly hoped that she'd get up and go get dressed, or maybe pack her things, buy a fast horse, and leave the kingdom forever. But that damnable woman didn't know any better than to smile and take his hand, or at least rest her hand in the space between two of his fingers.
Just so long as you keep in mind that you're still my apprentice.
She said with mock sternness.
Do you promise?
Neither of them understood what happened next. Sans felt something welling up that made him want to grab her, and he didn't know what would happen next, but he wanted it so badly that he backed away in sudden alarm. All he knew was that this feeling, this energy, had to go somewhere, and if he directed it at her, he could accidentally mash her into paste. The only thing he could think of was to whip around, look for something else to latch onto, and focus his attention on the pile of stones, etc., by the office. His magic was barely available, or so he would have said a minute ago. Fueled by the whatever it was, though, and with the barrier gone from one of the walls, Sans didn't even have to think about it. Frisk jumped back as the heap of debris by her office began to glow red, rising into the air and flying into the broken wall. To their mutual astonishment, the outside bricks and internal structures zipped back into place first, followed by more bricks, mortar, stone, wood, and finally the glass and lead of the windows. When the dust settled, the entire facade had been imperfectly but almost entirely restored, the floor sagging under the windows. Sans stared at his hand, still breathing heavily.
Huh.
He said by way of explanation.
Indeed.
Frisk absently ran her fingers through her hair again, working out a tangle as she examined the wall.
Did I know you could do that?
I didn't know I could do that.
Now that the unfamiliar energy was gone, Sans found he wanted to sit down. He sat down next to her, comfortably but not dangerously close.
Well, I need a break from life.
He said, which got a laugh out of her. He snorted.
Break. I actually didn't mean that one.
Frisk gave a long, long sigh.
We'll knock down your fee to 3 or 4 days of repairs,
she said gravely. Sans couldn't help grinning.
I always knew there was more to life than money.
She kept a straight face until he added,
Making it pretty again is gonna be a pain in the glass.
Whereupon she broke out in hysterical snorting laughter, which cracked him up in turn and guaranteed a minutes-long feedback loop. As nice as this all was, Sans was a little concerned when he got under control and she kept going, and ended up nearly gasping for breath.
You okay, kid? You need some water?
Oh, Lord.
Frisk wiped her eyes on her already damp sleeve.
Sans, you're killing me.
Silence. Frisk thought about it and promptly buried her head as far between her knees as she could get it.
I didn't do that on purpose,
she said, muffled and sheepish. Sans shifted his weight. He wasn't ready to admit to himself how badly the whole attack had scared him, much less to her. Just to check, he considered escaping again. Maybe once she was letting him walk around with her outside, and his magic was naturally restored. And now, less than 12 hours after doing his damnedest at it, he couldn't believe how much he hated the idea. No problem, really. He could chalk it up to her letting him connect with Papyrus and needing to make it up to her. Also, holy shit, 1,000 dinar every day for the next 25 days? That was as solid a set of reasons as he'd ever come up with.
Well,
he finally said.
Guess you'd better get your scary witch dress on and go tell everyone about this whole mess.
He snapped his fingers, making an odd click as something occurred to him.
That's right. I got both those knives off of him. Maybe someone can take a look at him and figure out who he was, where they were from.
Frisk raised her head, staring into space.
No,
she said, as if to herself. The boss monster looked askance, and she smiled in a small, nasty way he hadn't seen before.
We won't say anything.
The smile grew.
I'll go about my day as if nothing happened, except I'll be accompanied everywhere by a 10-foot skeleton, Whoever set him after me will have no idea what happened, and it'll drive them absolutely mad. We can see if anyone incriminates themselves, but oh, I'm going to enjoy this.
It's a neat idea, but the garbage threw itself out already, remember?
Sans indicated the repaired wall.
Someone's bound to notice him.
The young woman did a remarkable impression of shock and distress, eyes wide and mouth hanging open before she murmured,
That poor man jumped from such a height? What a hideous tragedy. Peace be upon his soul, and those of his loved ones.
Damn.
was all Sans could say. He might have killed the guy and covered it up, but he couldn't look that cute telling a bare-ass lie. Also,
Ain't you a priestess? Isn't that a little,
Frisk scowled. Despite her bedhead and furry robe, she was the very image of sternness, and yes, determination.
I was taught that it is my duty to aid the weak and be an instrument of justice against people who, for example, want to stab me in my own bedroom when I've done nothing to harm them. It is no sin to protect yourself.
The skeleton shrugged, holding his hands out.
Okay, that's enough. I think I love you. What do I sign up to kill people for you?
The priestess laughed.
I bet you say that to every girl you try to escape from. And please, don't kill anyone.
She glanced at the clock, and her amusement melted into panic.
Dirt. I have matins in 20 minutes.
She sprang to her feet and made a beeline for her dressing room.
Can you please find my veil for me?
She called before she shut the door. Sans also got up, muttering,
Dirt? Seriously?
as he retrieved the veil from where it had blown onto the table. As an afterthought, he returned to the bedroom and picked up the assassin's daggers. He studied them, saying out loud,
I think I'm screwed, is what I am.
then placed them on the nightstand. He heard Frisk emerge from her dressing room and went to meet her as she asked,
Sans, do you have my...
He handed the veil over.
Thank you, sir.
She threw the veil over her head and adjusted the headdress over it.
May I assume that you haven't been to many religious services? Well, we have an oral contract, effective immediately, and I'm going to church, so you are going to church.
She inclined her head, moving toward the double doors.
Follow me.
And of course, he did.
Messing with people is fun.
I can't
usually,
wait.
I'm usually not big into cliffhangers, but in this case, it's
it's gonna
YouTube.
be fun. I never realized how much fun it is to leave people on a cliffhanger. No wonder people do it. These period inaccurate, beautiful windows.
Well,
Um,
that's the nice thing about being a fantasy world. It's like these elements don't go together. Just use magic.
Arrows can make it through big windows.
Well, they are 15 stories up.
Arrows can make it through big windows. Sans looked around wildly for an escape. The windows were too small, but maybe he could. How's that for intense?
That's better.
Doing that voice gave me weird physical sensations. I should try doing it more. It's fun.
That's too much information, young lady. We're all about dignity and
No, I have mild synesthesia, so sometimes things like that happen where like a sound will have a physical sensation or whatever. I didn't think I was going to have that nightmare again before we woke up. I thought it'd be fine. She took a step onto the bed, leaning over to grab his humerus. Sans, please say something. He shook her off, and she He shook her off, and she stumbled backwards, falling into the armchair. What the f*** was that? He rasped. That's the reason I have the barrier up in the first place. She swallowed hard. Frick. You know, Sans, I'd like to help. Frick. Sans stared at her. She wouldn't. Frick. This is when improv comes in.
Yep.
Your Eminence. Wow, that is not a good improv voice at all. Your Eminence? It was a male voice, deep and pleasant.
Very deep, very pleasant.
Daylight was showing through the closed shutters. Yes, of course, I'll be there. Yeah. said Frisk.
Damn it, that would have been perfect.
I give up! Backhanded the intruder so hard that the man rolled clear out of the bedroom, hitting the work table with a crack and a thump. Crack, thump! The skeleton clamped his teeth on the dagger's hilt and pried the blade out from between his knuckles, like a badass. Sorry. The skeleton...
Like a badass with no lips. Damn.
Like a badass without lips.
Yes.
To his great irritation, the man wasn't dead. He was only... Frick! He was gaunt and generally gross-looking, but had moved fast enough and aimed with knife... God damn it! Aimed with knife...
Oh, there goes the toilet. Hi, toilet.
Hello, toilet, my old friend. You've come to bother me again.
Indeed.
With
Okay, we're...
your valves softly leaking on the floor while I was sleeping.
Weeping. More like weeping, but anyway.
Weeping. But your pipes like stubborn... Frick! I messed up the song. Never mind. Alright, forget it. Sans glanced at the office door, which was ajar. When is a door not a door? When it's ajar. Ho ho!
When it's a third grade joke book.
Some people, I'm sure, listening to this haven't heard it. And they're probably laughing their butts off. And just like that, he launched himself at Frisk, closing the distance and ducking between Sans' legs like a snake. Snakes are known to duck between Sans' legs.
Yeah,
as the snakes frequently do.
They're known to close distance and go under things very quickly.
There's a snake in my legs. I couldn't even say that with a good... There's a snake in my legs. Frick. His soul still feeling a little queasy at how close the... His soul... Why? She never looked bad, but right now... Damn. But right now... Damn. Damn, girl!
The second damn was good. Anyway.
You okay, kid? He asked. You need some water? Oh, Lord! She wheezed. She wheezed. She wheezed. Frisk wiped her eyes on her already damp sleeve. Sans, you're killing me! Oh, frick, I shouldn't have said that! He snapped his fingers, making an odd click as something occurred to him. That's right. I got both these knives! Alright, take quick look, see them. Yeah, look at them. Where are these from? I don't know, but we found him on the assassin dude. I don't recognize him either. Wish you hadn't killed him. We could have interrogated him.
Focus.
Well, I wanted to get him out of the... Alright, I'm
Focus.
sorry, you need to go. The boss monster looked askance. I love that word, that's great. The boss monster looked askance, and she smiled in a small, nasty way he hadn't seen before. We won't say anything! The smile grew. I'll go about my day as if nothing happened, except that I'll be accompanied everywhere with a good old big boy. We'll see if anyone incriminates. Oh, I'm going to enjoy this. It's a neat idea, but the garbage threw itself out already, remember? Sans indicated the repaired wall. Someone's bound to notice him. The young woman did a remarkable impression of shock and distress, eyes wide and mouth hanging open before she murmured, The poor man jumped from such a height. What a hideous tragedy. Peace be upon his soul and those of his loved ones. Damn, girl, was all Sans could say. He might have killed the guy and covered it up, but he couldn't look that cute and tell him... Damn it. He might have killed the guy and covered it up, but he couldn't look that cute telling a bare-ass lie. Also, ain't you a princess? Isn't that a little... Frisk scowled. Despite her bedhead and furry robe, she was the very image of sternness. And yet... Damn it. And yes... And yes, determination. I was taught it's my duty, but this guy, I don't care about him. He could go himself. I don't care about him. The skeleton shrugged, holding his hands out. Okay, that's enough. I think I love you. Where do I sign up to kill people for you? The priestess laughed. I bet you say that to everybody. You're cheap! Sans, do you have my... He handed the veil over. Thank you, sir! She threw the veil over her head and adjusted the headdress over it. May I assume you haven't been to no church none, have you, boy? Already, that's what I expected. And of course, he did.
Excellent.
Aces. Alrighty, there we go. It's done.
Hooray! Cool.